Mary Kathleen Schlais, known to her loved ones as Mary Kay, was born on November 11, 1949, in Champlain, Minnesota. Raised in a large family, she developed a profound love for art from an early age. By the time she reached high school, Mary's passion for creativity had already taken root. She excelled in painting and sculpture, and her exceptional talent did not go unnoticed. Her teachers saw something special in her, and they encouraged her to pursue a future in the arts. Mary's dedication to her craft led her to the University of Minnesota, where she studied fine arts with a focus on painting and sculpture. She became fluent in German, Danish, and even learned some Japanese during her studies, further fueling her desire to explore the world. After graduation, Mary continued to chase her passion. Despite not making much money from her art, she remained determined, living a simple life and sharing an apartment with a friend. Mary often traveled by hitchhiking to other cities, relying on this method of transportation to save money. On February 15, 1974, at 25 years old, she set out on a journey to attend an art show in Chicago. With a sign that read Madison in her hand, Mary began her journey from her apartment in Minnesota. She planned to hitchhike to Madison, Wisconsin, where she would then make her way to Chicago. At 10:30 a.m. that day, Mary set off, unaware that this would be the last time anyone would see her alive. By the end of the day, her body would be discovered in a remote area near Springbrook, Wisconsin. Mary's life, full of promise, would be tragically cut short, and the mystery surrounding her death would linger for decades. On the afternoon of February 15, 1974, a man named Dennis was driving along a quiet, rural road in Wisconsin when he noticed something out of place. He saw a gold-colored car parked on a dead-end road. There was a man and a woman standing beside the car, appearing to be involved in a heated argument or possibly a fight. Dennis wasn't entirely sure what he was witnessing, but something about the scene made him uneasy. He continued driving, yet the image of the confrontation stayed on his mind. A few minutes later, Dennis decided to turn around and return to the scene. When he arrived, he was stunned to find a young woman's body lying on the side of the road. Blood was visible on her clothing, but there was something strange. There was very little blood at the scene, indicating that the victim had likely been killed elsewhere. Shocked by the discovery, Dennis did not immediately call the police. Instead, he drove home, telling his wife about what he had seen. He then asked his neighbor to come with him, and together they returned to the location. Only then did they contact the authorities. When law enforcement arrived at the scene, they confirmed the woman was dead. She had been stabbed multiple times, and while her body was left on the roadside, the lack of blood suggested she had been transported to this location after her murder. Investigators found a man's hat near the crime scene and took casts of tire tracks in the snow. There was no sign of the victim's purse, which raised suspicions about the motive for the murder. Authorities later learned that the woman was Mary Kay Schlais, who had been on her way to an art show in Chicago. Despite a composite sketch of the suspect and tips from the public, no clear leads emerged, and the investigation faced immediate roadblocks. As investigators carefully examined the crime scene and reviewed Dennis's account, they began to uncover inconsistencies in his story. Dennis had initially provided a detailed description of the events he had witnessed, but certain aspects of his narrative didn't quite add up. He explained that he had been driving down a rarely used dead-end road, yet his reason for being there raised questions. According to Dennis, he had taken the road because he thought his dog wanted a longer ride. This explanation seemed odd to the investigators, as it was unusual for someone to take a detour onto a seldom-traveled road for such a reason. What struck the detectives even more was Dennis's behavior after discovering the body. Instead of contacting the police immediately, he went home first, and it wasn't until later, after fetching his neighbor, that the authorities were finally called. This delay in notifying the police seemed suspicious, and investigators began to consider Dennis as a potential suspect. To further probe Dennis's memory and see if any hidden details might emerge, detectives brought him in for hypnosis sessions. Despite 2 attempts to unlock any buried memories or provide more clarity about the events, nothing conclusive came to light. Meanwhile, an anonymous letter had been sent to the police, suggesting that Dennis might have been involved in the murder. However, this letter didn't provide any new evidence or insights, leaving investigators frustrated. The police also turned their attention to the man Dennis had described, a slim, white male with light brown hair. Could he have been the actual killer? The description matched several other potential suspects, but without solid evidence, the investigation continued to stall. Despite the suspicions around Dennis, no direct link could be established, and his involvement in the murder was never proven. Eventually, the suspicion surrounding Dennis faded, and the investigation had to move forward with few solid leads. As the investigation into Mary Kay Schlais' murder progressed, investigators encountered a crucial lead when they discovered a similar unsolved case from 1972. The case involved the murder of a young woman named Jolie, who had been found dead under eerily similar circumstances. Jolie, like Mary, had been hitchhiking, and witnesses had seen her getting into a gold-colored car driven by a young man. The victim's body had been discarded in a remote area, and, like Mary's, there were no signs of sexual assault. This led detectives to speculate that both cases might be connected and possibly the work of the same individual. Although the similarities between the two murders were striking, investigators faced significant challenges in drawing any concrete links between them. Despite the fact that Jolie's case mirrored Mary's in many ways, there was no tangible evidence that tied the two crimes together. The investigation into Jolie's murder had also stalled in the past, with all leads either being exhausted or unsubstantiated. A list of potential suspects was compiled, but each one proved fruitless. The authorities continued to revisit the similarities, hoping to find a thread that would lead them to the killer. Witnesses who had seen a man matching the composite sketch from Mary's case did report spotting him driving a gold-colored sedan, but these sightings offered no further clues. Despite these promising connections, investigators were left with nothing to prove that the two cases were linked or that they were committed by the same individual. Mary Schlais' case was, once again, left unsolved. With no new leads or evidence to pursue, the investigation seemed to stall once more, and the connection to Jolie's murder ultimately fizzled out. The cold case continued to haunt the community, with Mary's family left wondering if justice would ever be served. As the years passed and the investigation stagnated, law enforcement began exploring more extreme theories to explain the similarities between Mary Schlais' murder and other unsolved crimes. In the early 1980s, investigators considered the possibility that a serial killer might have been responsible for Mary's death. This theory gained traction due to the nature of the crime. Mary had been hitchhiking, a common trait among the serial killers of the time. One prominent suspect was Randall Woodfield, a convicted serial killer whose known victims included hitchhikers. Woodfield had been active throughout the 1970s and early 1980s, and he had confessed to the murders of 44 people. His crimes often involved picking up young women on the roadside, making him a logical suspect in cases like Mary's. Investigators believed that Woodfield's pattern of picking up hitchhikers and his violent tendencies made him a strong candidate for the Schlais case. However, despite the compelling nature of this theory, DNA testing and further investigation failed to establish a concrete link between Woodfield and the crime. He was thoroughly investigated, and his connections to other crimes were scrutinized. But after testing his DNA and comparing it to evidence found at the scene, law enforcement ruled out Woodfield as the killer. The investigation into the serial killer hypothesis was eventually discarded. Despite the similarities in the nature of the murders, no direct evidence or connection could be found that would link Woodfield to Mary's death. With that, the case of Mary Schlais, like many others from that era, was left without resolution. Investigators continued to explore new suspects and theories over the years, but with no new evidence coming to light, the case continued to grow cold. In the early 2000s, significant advancements in forensic technology provided a new opportunity to solve cases that had remained cold for decades. DNA analysis, which had become a cornerstone of modern criminal investigations, allowed investigators to revisit the case of Mary Schlais with renewed hope. Despite the lack of progress in previous years, forensic technology now offered more powerful tools for solving cold cases. In the initial investigation, traces of blood and skin were found under Mary's fingernails, which likely came from her attacker. However, forensic scientists in the 1970s were unable to extract a usable DNA profile from the evidence at that time. With the advancements in DNA profiling, detectives now had the tools to test this evidence again. In addition, a hat found near the crime scene, which had been kept in evidence, contained several strands of hair. These strands were tested for DNA, but once again, no match was found in the FBI's database. Despite the setbacks, the case remained on the radar of investigators. In late 2022, the breakthrough came in the form of genetic genealogy. This emerging technique allowed detectives to use publicly available genealogy databases to trace genetic connections and uncover familial ties that could lead to a suspect. The method offered new possibilities for identifying suspects in cases that were previously considered unsolvable. The introduction of genetic genealogy opened a new chapter in the investigation, providing the key that investigators hoped would lead to a resolution in the case. With the combination of modern forensic analysis and this new approach, law enforcement believed they could finally uncover the truth behind Mary Schlais's death. In November 2024, after months of painstaking work by genetic genealogists, a breakthrough finally emerged in the case of Mary Schlais. The DNA evidence recovered from the hat found near the crime scene, which had been stored for years, was pivotal in solving the case. The forensic team painstakingly analyzed the DNA, despite the fact that it was only a partial profile. The fact that it was a partial sample made the process much more challenging, but they were undeterred. After extensive analysis and comparison with publicly available genealogy databases, the team identified a match, pointing to an 84-year-old man from Minnesota named John Miller. Detectives were able to track down Miller's family members and, through careful DNA comparison, confirmed his connection to the crime scene. The match was undeniable, and with this revelation, the investigation was finally able to take the next step. When confronted with the irrefutable evidence, Miller confessed to the murder. He admitted that on the day of Mary's death, he had picked her up while she was hitchhiking, as she made her way to Chicago for an art show. Once they were out of the city, Miller began pressuring Mary for sexual favors. When she refused, Miller became enraged. He then pulled out a knife and stabbed her multiple times. After the brutal attack, he drove to a remote dead-end road, intending to bury her body in the snow. However, when another car approached, Miller panicked and abandoned the body, leaving it by the side of the road. Miller's confession brought an end to a 50-year-long investigation, providing closure to the authorities and, most importantly, to Mary Schlais's family, who had lived with the uncertainty and the community. The resolution of Mary K. Schlais case brought closure after 5 decades of uncertainty. Her family, especially her surviving relatives, finally had answers to a painful mystery that had haunted them for years. However, the emotional toll was undeniable. Tragically, Mary's parents had passed away before they could see justice served for their daughter's murder. The case's resolution also had a profound impact on the community of Springbrook, where Mary's body had been discovered. For years, the murder had remained an open wound in the area, and Mary's death became a haunting story passed down through generations. The use of genetic genealogy in solving the case represented a significant leap in forensic science, but the pain of the long wait for justice lingered. John Miller's confession brought relief, but it also left lingering questions. Was he responsible for other unsolved cases? Investigators continued to examine his possible connections to other crimes, but as of now, no further links have been established. While the case closed, Mary Schlais' legacy endures, not just through the justice finally served, but also as a reminder of the persistence of law enforcement and the breakthroughs that made solving this cold case possible. The dedication of investigators and genetic genealogists is a testament to the power of modern science and the refusal to give up on victims, no matter how much time has passed.